Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving deep into one of my absolute favorite hybrid burst builds in Where Winds Meet, the Heaven Quaker Spear and Strategic Sword setup. If you're a player who loves watching your enemies bleed out, enjoys slick weapon swaps, and lives for those cinematic burst windows, then trust me, this build is made for you. I'm going to cover everything you need to know: the inner ways, the mystic arts, the best gear and stats, a full skill rotation, and some pro tips to squeeze every last drop of damage out of it. Let's get right into it. Alright, let's start with a quick overview. The entire philosophy of this build is to apply 5 stacks of bleed onto your target, use the Heaven Quaker Spear Ease Sober Sorrow buff to amplify your power, and then detonate all those bleed stacks for a massive burst of damage. The key to making this work efficiently is the Wolf Chaser's Art Inner Way, which helps you get your buffs faster, even on a single target. The real skill here is timing. You have to keep a close eye on your debuff durations to make sure you unleash your burst at the perfect moment for maximum impact. So, let's talk about our weapons and the overall technique. Your primary weapons are the Strategic Sword, which is our main tool for applying bleed and executing finishers, and the Heaven Quaker Spear, which we use to activate our powerful buffs. The playstyle is a beautiful dance. You apply bleed with your sword, then you quickly swap to the spear to buff yourself and debuff the enemy. After that, it's back to the sword to detonate everything for that huge damage spike. Think of it as a patient pressure playstyle that builds up to an incredibly satisfying payoff. It's all about damage over time, leading to a massive explosion of pain. Now, for the engine of this build, the inner ways. What should you pick? First and foremost, Wolf Chaser's Art is the absolute core of this build. It lowers the combo count required to get your Sober Sorrow buff, and it gives you a chance to speed up that combo count based on your bleed stacks. It is an absolute must-have. Next up, Morale Chant. This gives you passive U-River stacks, which provide a nice little boost to your damage and healing. You can swap this in for Insightful Strike to maintain both your sustain and your damage output. Adaptive Steel is another handy one to have. It helps you get weapon-specific martial skill effects and generally makes your rotations feel much smoother. And finally, Sword Horizon. This is crucial because it grants you the crisscrossing sword's follow-up attack. This move is your big finisher. It consumes 5 bleed stacks to deal a massive amount of bleed-based damage, perfectly synergizing with our entire strategy. A quick note, the Bellstrike Umbra Inner Art line also works well with weapon swapping and dot play, but always make sure you have Wolf Chaser Ease Art and Morale Chant in your loadout to optimize your uptime and survivability. Moving on to Mystic Arts. These are more situational but can be incredibly powerful. First, Ghost Bind. This lets you flash in front of your enemies, immobilizing up to 6 of them and breaking their vital points. It is fantastic for setting up a completely free and uninterrupted burst window where you can go to town. Then there's Dragon's Breath. You drink from your gourd to enter an intoxicated state, which deals ignition damage over time to nearby enemies and grants you a 15% damage reduction plus fortitude. Use this to add another reliable dot source to your damage profile and to make yourself tankier during your big burst combos. Think about the synergy here. You can use Ghost Bind to lock down a group of enemies, then immediately pop Dragon's Breath to layer on that ignition dot. This creates the perfect moment to start setting up your bleed stacks. The result is multiple sources of incoming damage over time, all while you prepare for that massive sword and spear detonation. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, let's get into the gear you'll want to farm for. For your weapon set, I highly recommend Hawkwing. The 2-piece bonus gives you a flat 0.1% affinity rate, but the 4-piece bonus is where it shines. When your affinity triggers, you get the Hawkwing buff, which increases your physical attack by 2% for 5 seconds and stacks up to 5 times. Why is this so good? Well, our multi-hit and dot playstyle means we're constantly prosing affinity. This gives us consistent attack stacks that scale perfectly with our bleed damage, especially right before we detonate our stacks. It's absolutely best in slot for this build's sustained scaling. For your armor set, you'll want to go with Eagle Rise. The 2-piece gives a simple 1 to physical defense. The 4-piece bonus, however, is what makes it amazing for us. When you deal damage over time or heal, you gain Eagle Rise stacks. Each stack reduces the damage you take by 1.2%, up to a maximum of 5 stacks. At max stacks, you gain the Eagle Guard buff, which reduces the next instance of incoming damage by a massive 90% or 45% against bosses. This has a 30-second cooldown. Since we are a dot-focused build, we naturally proc Eagle Rise all the time. It provides solid, consistent damage mitigation, and a clutch, get-out-of-jail-free card for those huge telegraph boss attacks. Now for the stats you should prioritize. Your primary stat is attack, without a doubt. This build's bleed damage scales linearly with your attack power, so you want to maximize this stat above everything else, even crit. For your secondary stats, focus on affinity and momentum. These directly support prosing the Hawkwing set bonus, which as we discussed is a huge part of our damage scaling. And for your tertiary stats, grab endurance and defense as needed. You need to be able to survive between your spear buffs and eagle rise windows, so don't neglect your survivability. Alright, let's put it all together. Here is the step-by-step skill rotation guide. This is the bread and butter loop that you should practice until it becomes pure muscle memory. First, you engage with your strategic swords charge skill to start applying bleed stacks. Keep using your charge skill or inner track slash until the enemy has 5 stacks of bleed. If a target resists, just use inner track slash to top them up. Once you have 5 stacks, it's time for a weapon swap. Switch to your Heaven Quaker Spear and immediately cast Sober Sorrow. This will activate the spear's powerful buff on you and apply a debuff to the enemy. Next, use the Spear's Sweep All skill. This will increase your damage even further and re-up bleed, all while reducing the enemy's defenses. Now, swap back to your strategic sword. Immediately use Inner Balance Strike 3 to trigger a burst of bleed damage. Then, time your Sword Horizon or crisscrossing swords follow up perfectly. This is the big moment. This finisher consumes all 5 bleed stacks from massive explosion of bleed damage. After the burst, you can reset the loop. Use your strategic swords charged skill to close the gap on your target, re-apply your bleed stacks, and repeat the entire process from the beginning. Here's a pro timing tip. That Sword Horizon follow-up, crisscrossing swords, is your highest damage finisher. The real skill expression of this build lies in practicing the timing window right after casting your strategic sword skills. Mastering this timing is where most of your burst potential comes from, so spend some time in the training grounds getting it down. Let's wrap up with a few more play tips and tricks to really elevate your gameplay. First, always keep an eye on the bleed debuff's duration on your target. You do not want it to fall off before you can pop it with your crisscrossing swords finisher. That's a huge damage loss. Second, use Ghostbind strategically. Lock down groups of enemies or a boss during your multi-hit setup phase. This ensures you don't lose stacks or waste precious time repositioning. Remember that Dragon's Breath gives you both survivability through damage reduction and fortitude, and extra damage from the ignition dot. It's excellent to drink right before you go into your big burst window. Also, try to line up your Hawkwing affinity procs during your bleed stacking window. This will give you those extra attack stacks right before you detonate everything, maximizing your burst. And finally, remember that Eagle Rise's Eagle Guard buff is on a 30-second cooldown. Treat it as a free oh no button, and try to save it for those big boss mechanics that would otherwise one-shot you. So, who should run this build? It's perfect for players who love timing-based gameplay, enjoy weapon swap mechanics, and get a kick out of dot-centric burst damage. It excels in single-target boss fights, especially during phases that allow you to patiently stack your blades before unloading massive damage. It is less ideal for pure spam or one-shot scenarios where you simply don't have the time to build up your full 5 bleed stacks. And there you have it. The complete guide to the Heaven Quaker Spear and Strategic Sword build. It's all about bleed stacks, weapon swaps, and huge, satisfying finishers. If this guide helped you out, do me a favor and smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure to ring that bell so you don't miss any more Where Winds Meet guides. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next run.